What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Transparency. We're gonna try this again. Late night, gonna work. WSU showing off incompetency. WSU wrong body cam, and it belongs to Curtis Whitman right here on 11/26. He's at a football game. Okay. Watch this.
What I'll probably do is just call you and her in a couple of days and see how things are going. Ask her about what happened and all that kind of stuff. She lives here. I'm on the west side, right? Okay. Yeah, I'll give you a call or send me everything you got, and then I can call you and talk to you. Just I don't want to bug you with what happened and all that right now. So Curtis, right? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Curtis, right? Mm-hmm. So again, I don't know what these people are doing, but I asked for between 11/28 and 11/29 pertaining to Brian Kohlberger. But this is Curtis Whitman. So, have any of you guys got Cyray's book yet in the mail? Anybody? Anybody? Everybody? Everybody? Well, page 218, this is where it's in direct conflict with Brent Turvey. It's the 10.5 investigative drift at scale, the Kohlberger case. The timeline that should have prevented failure. And this is not accurate. The murders occurred on November 13, 2022. The crime scene was completely processed. A K-bar knife sheath was recovered, preserved, was competently processed. So this sentence I struggle with. The murders occurred on November 13th, 2022. The crime scene was competently processed. Period. What? A K-bar knife sheath preserved and submitted to the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Lab by November 16th. Nothing about the early forensic handling raises concern. On November 22nd, DNA from the sheath was submitted to Othram Labs for SMP profiling, initiating the investigative genetic genealogy process. That decision immediately placed the investigation under the Department of Justice interim policy on IgG, correct, which permits these methods only after reasonable investigative leads have been exhausted. The case was days old. No reasonable definition of exhausted applied. By November 4th, Othram had generated an SNP profile and identified a distant familial match. This was expected. IgG rarely begins with close relatives. The process is slow by design, methodical by necessity, and legitimate only because it is constrained. Then this is where I cannot believe I'm going to say this sentence. Then on November 29th, something critical occurred. Washington State University Police produced a formal report. No. Watch this. I have every single report that was authored by Curtis Whitman. I have every single report that was authored by Officer Tanego between 11/13 to 12/12. I've went through them with you guys, except for Daniel Tanego's, which I will. I went through each and every one of them, and there is nothing on the 29th. Nothing. There is no formal report. So it says that Washington State University Police produced a formal report identifying Brian Kohlberger as a possible suspect. Where is this formal report? This was not rumor or speculation. It was a law enforcement report generated in response to a direct request from Moscow Police Department, grounded in vehicle information investigators were actively seeking. At that moment, it was the most credible investigative lead in the case. None of this is true. And then it vanished. This doesn't exist. I asked for every single Curtis Whitman is the only person, and that's what they want to try to talk about is what happened on the 29th. Remember? And this is the body cam that they give me of Curtis Whitman. And it's on the 26th of him at some football game. So it's a book typo? No, it's not a book typo. And then he has I don't know why, I don't know who checked this, but the Jen McCabe section, he has the defense and the prosecution mixed up. I don't know what the hell happened there. Because it was never the prosecution's theory, like that Jennifer McCabe was Google searching anything in the middle of the night. Nothing in the record explains how that report was evaluated. There is no report. Why it was not acted upon. There was no report to act upon. Or where it went. There was no report. Does Cy not understand that that's a complete lie in the PCA? This was the correct lead, delivered early by another law enforcement agency and allowed to die quietly. What? You guys, do I need to go to bed? What the fuck is going on? That silence is a high quality lead enters the system and timeline gravity redirects attention elsewhere without a documented structural test. What the hell is that sentence even mean? Listen, I'm treating this book as a textbook, just like I would any other methodology book that I've ever, methods book that I went through in criminal justice while studying. And this chapter is investigative drift at scale. Because chapter 10 is where this is at, and chapter 10 is about drift. Chapter 10 is drift. The purpose of this chapter. Drift is the moment an investigation begins answering a different question than the one it believes it is answering. The gaslighting. It is neither misconduct nor corruption, but belief gaining momentum under pressure before structure has finished its work. Drift emerges quietly through language choices, authority reinforcement, and the accumulating gravity of timelines that begin to reward coherence over accuracy. Once it takes hold, investigations do not suddenly collapse. They continue forward, often efficiently, often confidently, and often in the wrong direction. Drift does not require bad actors. It requires unanswered questions to be replaced by comfortable answers before the system has earned them. It enters through 3 channels: language, authority, and timeline gravity. This chapter names each one and shows how behavioral fusion closes it. So, if you're reading this as a textbook, like you should be, to understand like what he's trying to do and explain through like different cases, you have to start from the beginning, because what this book is about is that it's about Cyray implementing a new method that investigators should have to follow. But there is so much. I mean, I love Side of Death, but there's a lot of word salad. There's a lot of bullshit. Okay. You have to have the right facts to be able to to show an example of something. And I was just shocked. Drift does not require bad actors. The 2 timeline structure is the diagnostic instrument. When the boundary between the investigation timeline and the crime timeline begin to erode, when belief migrates into assertion without passing through the controls that separate them, drift is already underway. The separation is not administrative. It is the architectural mechanisms that make drift visible before it becomes consequential. Okay. He then goes on to say, here's a short story about drift for him. I think the example he should use for drift is the Holly Bobo case. That's the example to use. Because how they are claiming that Holly Bobo was raped is unheard of when there's 0 evidence of that. Now, drift does not belong to investigators alone. 10.1.1 of the chapter. What this case illustrates is something the wrongful conviction community has rarely been willing to say plainly. Drift is not a disease that belongs exclusively to law enforcement. The Justice Project, because that's about that case that is the example that he wants to talk about. The Justice Project entered this case with a genuine belief that they were correcting an injustice. Procedural failure was real. The untested kit was real. The compressed evidentiary record was real. Their concern was legitimate. And yet the organization moved from legitimate concern to confirmed injustice narrative before the full picture had been assembled, blah, blah, before the victim's circumstances were understood, and before anyone had asked what it would actually mean if the conviction fell. Drift and the illusion of control. Drift does not discriminate. It affects smart investigators, experienced investigators, and well intentioned investigators alike. Anyone who believes they are immune is not demonstrating mastery, but a misunderstanding of the phenomenon itself. So if you believe that you wouldn't drift in a case, you would damn lie. You lying to yourself. In this profession, there are only two kinds of investigators: those who have already drifted and those who will eventually drift. Drift is inevitable. Recognizing it is not. The difference between, so drifting is like a rabbit hole. Would you say the same thing? Like drift? Maybe. The difference between a correctable drift and a catastrophic one is not intelligence, training, or effort. It is self-awareness applied early enough to matter. So that would be a person. Self-awareness is a person. Investigative drift rarely announces itself as an error. It presents as progress. It's like confirmation bias. It does not emerge from recklessness or indifference, but from a momentum. God, the Kohlberg case is not the fucking case to do this with. Just like starting Fight for a Family off of, thinking that you're going to help. Man, unreal. Okay, so according to Cy, in the Idaho4 case, the moment drift took control. On December 10th, Othram was instructed to stop all work. The FBI assumed control over the IGG process. This was the inflection point. Othram was operating with DOJ policy constraints, which explicitly prohibits law enforcement from accessing genealogy databases that do not permit law enforcement use and from poisoning as consumers. Othram would not violate that constraint. How do you know? I said, just so we're clear, Othram is also, they also have a contract with the FBI. Othram would not violate the DOJ policy when working for Idaho State Police. I said all you have to do is figure out when Othram was completely out of the picture and who the genealogists were that did the work. So he's saying that the FBI did. So basically, like, Othram's good. They were not going to violate a policy. The FBI is like, give it to us. We're going to take it from here because we're going to violate our own policy. The FBI did. It took possession of the SNP profile and conducted searches in databases that explicitly prohibit law enforcement access, concealing its involvement, and posing as consumers. Conduct directly prohibited by Section 7 of the DOJ intern policy. This is what I put out on my channel fucking years ago. They also did not, but before that, see, like Ann Taylor's like, no, you have to back up even from on December 10th. You have to back up from that because they were supposed to go and get search warrants and they never did. Where's that? That's bad acting. Where's that part? How are we missing? Why are we jumping from November 29th in this book to December 10th? The moment that they decided to do IGG on November 22nd, when it was taken there, just when you knew damn well that you did not exhaust any investigative, you didn't do shit. You were also supposed to be getting search warrants and you didn't get them. So I believes the 10th because This is when the FBI, and so let me ask you something. How is that not bad actors? How is the FBI choosing to do that? Not a bad actor. How is that drift? It's not fucking drift. That is direct fucking action, man. That is, I mean, damn. There's no way that that's drift. Sorry. I get a big fat F on the test because there was no way that I would ever write that. I will take my F in this class because there's no way that I would write that. A person, multiple people communicated, and there was people worked in concert with that. There was colluding with that to make that decision to shut it down, give it to us, and we're going to go cheat. People. Bad actors did that. The supervisors in the FBI looked the other way. So that means the institution permitted it. Bad actors, not drift. Nothing about the situation required this intervention. The IgG process was active, lawful, and progressing normally. A distant match is not a dead end. It is the beginning of genealogy, the genealogical work, and that work takes time. There was no investigative emergency, no exhausted pathway, no imminent collapse of options. The only thing the process was not producing was speed. Speed became the priority. Or framing became the priority. The decision was not driven by investigative failure. What? It was driven by intolerance for constraint. What? No. Come on. Why would you make excuses for that? It was driven because there's no fucking consequences. Because they were never going to say that they used IgG. They were going to lie the entire time and make up this fallacy about what you wrote here this November 29th that never happened. Cy doesn't have all the material. I'm sorry, but he just doesn't. There is no November 29th fucking Washington State University Police formal report identifying Brian Colbert as a possible suspect. There's none. WSU put out all of their shit. In fact, they ran a check of Brian Kohlberger's name to see when it first was like came up in their database with anything that they did. Like, I'm just, I'm telling you, Ann Taylor did not give them all of this information. Ann Taylor did not provide, like, for example, Gabrielle Vargas working on the case. She didn't have the fucking discovery. She wasn't provided the discovery. Just because you worked on this case doesn't mean like you got like, oh, here you go. You guys understand that the discovery was just so voluminous that how are people like looking at it that are part of your team? Who's looking at it? Your lawyer, whoever who's calling the shots, is the one that's breaking off the pieces for the experts, depending on their role. I want to see this November 29th report listing Brian Kohlberger from WSU in a formal report as a identifying Brian Colbert as a possible suspect. Word is a formal report. And if he's going to say that a formal report is, I mean, there is none. WSU did not write up one report. Not a single report was written up by WSU. Nobody. I pulled Curtis Whitman's every single incident report. Every time that he did it, every time he was involved in assisting an agency, he writes a report and it says assisting an agency. I showed you guys this, and it tags and it shows that he was working with, X, Y, and Z, who he would meet up from Moscow because they needed something, right? There is no fucking report on 11/28 or 29. And then this is the body cam that I get, which they're correcting right now, I guess. Unbelievable. The investigation did not need a shortcut. It needed discipline. No, our criminal justice system needs, there are consequences for actions, and the judges are not, they're the reason that that police officers are doing what they're doing and prosecutors are doing what they're doing, because judges are not, like, today was the first day that I saw a judge in the Karen Reed civil shit bring everybody in that it's violating a court order. Somebody did it, but everybody's saying they didn't do it, but somebody did do it. And there's going to be consequences from that. And a consequence could be that there's no more discovery that's coming from Michael Proctor. And wherever it is right now, then whatever you have, that's what you're going to trial with. This is how drift announces itself. Not with malice, but with impatience. Well, yeah, if you want to call it drift, then drift is something that would be an innocent thing. But this isn't the case to do this with. I'm just sorry. I just completely disagree. And all I ask for is receipts. Show me the receipts. Show me what you think that they're considering a formal report, because then you could help me sue WSU, and you can help me sue Moscow Police Department, who has been providing us with false public requests. And I could actually be awarded money, not just even, I could get punitive shit. This is causing me emotional damage. I can't sleep at night. But on December 19th, the FBI provided Kohlberger's name based on IgG results. That's what they're saying. But how do you know if that's true? By policy, those results were to be treated as a tip, not evidence. Correct? That classification would later become the mechanism by which the method itself was quietly laundered out of the case. How are you using language like this and not saying that there are not bad actors here when you're talking about laundering something out of a case? Backfiling reality. Backfilling reality. By December 23rd, Moscow Police Department had drafted search warrants for AT&T records. None disclosed the IgG results. None referenced DNA. None explained how Kohlberger became the investigative focus. Yeah, it did. You guys. It's saying it became the focus because of what you're claiming over here on November 29th, it made it seem like the WSU turned over to Moscow the name Brian Kohlberger from the car. That never happened, though. But that's what the PCA claimed. And any reasonable person that's reading that is exactly how they're saying that they came to Brian Kohlberger, because that's what it's saying. That's why the judge wanted certain things. The magistrate, whatever. So I just disagree with that. By December 23rd, Moscow Police Department had drafted search warrants, I agree with this, for AT&T records. None disclosed the IgG results. None referenced DNA. Correct. None explained how Kohlberger became the investigative focus. No, they lied about. But do you see how by him saying none explained how Kohlberger became the investigative focus, by saying that sentence, that's acting like there isn't bad actors. Because they did try to explain how they got on Kohlberger, which was that they were because of the car, because of Daniel Tanego, not even him, but Curtis Whitman. Yet Idaho AG Criminal Division Chief Jeffrey Nye, later publicly stated that those warrants were issued solely because Kohlberger had been identified through DNA. Information never presented to the issuing judge. What? When did Jeffrey Nye ever say that? No, Jeffrey Nye kept on changing every time that they would win. Their argument kept changing. They were using it was like, okay, I got past the first gate. Now, it doesn't matter what I said in between the starting point and the first gate. Okay. It doesn't matter what I said there. Now I can just claim something different between gate then 1 and 2. And that's like basically testifying at the grand jury to something and then totally changing it after that. And you not being able to impeach with the grand jury testimony. Like, that's what was happening. Because Jeffrey Nye said that they would be significantly burdened if Hitler, by the feds violating their own policy, he knew what that would mean if Hitler found that was all of this stuff can go bye-bye. So I don't understand where he's saying that Jeff Nye, I would like to know where this is. Like, when did he say this? Yet Idaho AG Criminal Division Chief Jeffrey Nye later publicly stated that those publicly, I mean, is he saying after the trial happened that he publicly stated it then? Publicly stated that those warrants were issued solely because Kohlberger had been identified through DNA. Information never presented to the issuing judge. No affidavit, no attachment, no disclosure. Once Kohlberger had been identified through IgG, the method could not appear in the record. An alternative pathway was constructed to explain how focus arrived at him. How is that not bad actors? You guys, come on. I've read this book twice now. Twice, because I am so absolutely shocked. An alternative pathway was constructed to explain how focus arrived at him, relying primarily on phone records. And related data. No. It's all, oh my God. When those records fail to support the theory cleanly, interpretation bent to preserve the narrative. What? Why are you saying it like this? This is why kids don't get A's and B's on tests. None of this was necessary, he says. Investigators possessed a pristine crime scene sample and a named suspect. They could have obtained a direct DNA sample, overtly or covertly, and resolved the question transparently and lawfully. Instead, Drift ran the case. You guys, this isn't Drift. This is conscious colluding efforts to manipulate, fabricate an 18-page document. And that colluding began early on, extremely early on. And that's the question that that's the question that should be asked. Why the DOJ IGG policy exists. It exists because of our privacy and civil liberties is why it exists, DOJ policy, requiring heightened discretion, collaboration, and restraint. It draws hard lines, does it? Limiting when IGG may be used, does it? Restricting database access, does it? And forbidding law enforcement from possessing or posing as consumers, does it? Hitler just told us that you can do whatever the fuck you want. These are not suggestions. They are guardrails. I agree. 1,000. So then how can you say there's not bad actors here? A knowing policy violation does not automatically produce a constitutional violation. Correct, it doesn't. You're going after the character and the credibility of witnesses, though. You're going to be able to show, you'd want to be able to use it in that courtroom to attack the credibility of these fucking 3-letter agencies who think that just because they are in the FBI and us as jurors are giving them this. I don't give a fuck who you are. If your shit doesn't make sense to me, or I sniff a second of you being a snake lying piece of garbage, I have the right as a juror to just bye-bye. So Ann Taylor wanted to bring this up, and the whole purpose is to show how whoever was involved in making the decisions to do the IGG this way, and the FBI would just go and violate their own policy. And that's why it transferred hands. That's why it shut down with Othram and then went to the FBI. Ann Taylor should have made Ashley Jennings and Bill Thompson witnesses. And why she didn't is puss platter. They are witnesses because they made and were part of the decision making for violating the IGG DOJ policy. That's period. That's a fact. Go get somebody else to try this case, because Ann Taylor should have been filing with Jose Baez and then filed in the Shanna Gardner case. They should have been disqualified. They should have moved to disqualify them from trying this case. And both of them should have been witnesses, especially to all the search warrants. When you want to start putting prosecutors in as police officers in their roles, you guys, then they're witnesses. You did something in this case, and we need to ask you about it. That's what the same thing happened in the Shanna Gardner case. And I cannot wait to see how Jose Baez and Diane and Ashley go about it. It's going to be fucking lit. It'll just be interesting. But I would agree that a knowing policy violation does not automatically produce a constitutional violation, but it fundamentally alters how an investigation must be evaluated, raising unavoidable questions about whether subsequent steps were shaped by the need to protect the violation rather than pursue the truth. When governing constraints are bypassed and the resulting narrative is presented to courts without disclosure, the failure ceases to be tactical. It becomes institutional. That is drift with authority. So here so now instead of saying that this is bad actors and this is collusion and that this is 1000%, if this isn't a conspiracy, okay, guys, fuck that word. This is corruption. These are corrupt acts. These are deceitful acts. But here, Sai is like, this, what they did, the FBI violating the act, that is drift with authority. The cost of drift. This is an argument for transparency, not innocence. What occurred was a knowing decision to violate governing policy through a method understood to be indefensible if disclosed. If admitting that you guys did what you did. When deviation is necessary, the obligation is ownership. Investigators must explain what they did, why, and why it was required. That explanation is not a courtesy. It is the price of legitimacy. Yeah, also like validating. But it's also going to blow. I mean, when you say what you did, then it all blows up, right? That did not occur here. The method was concealed. Again, bad actors. This is humans doing this. The method was concealed, the violation hidden, and probable cause constructed through a parallel narrative. The defense was entitled to challenge that conduct, not to argue innocence by policy violation, but to question whether an investigation that knowingly broke its own rules deserves unqualified credibility. That's what I said at the beginning. This is all about credibility. We have the right to attack your credibility. Because if you're making a decision like that with that, then that is enough for me to show that and to question every single time that you had to make a decision. What'd you do? Like, you're a cheater. And you're just creating something that's not there. You're lying. You're manipulating. You're being deceitful. Lies. And I'm saying just call it what it is. These fuckers lied their asses off. When the court later barred the jury from hearing how Kolber was identified, remember, like, we're just going to say a generic tip, the problem was not resolved. It was deferred. This is why the state ultimately found itself in a posture where a plea became conceivable, not as strategy, not as leverage, but as damage control. Not because the crime was ambiguous or the evidence weak. I totally disagree with that. But because the investigative path had been structurally compromised. When a case depends on concealed methods and narrative backfilling, conviction does not resolve the problem, it delays it. That is why, for the first time in my career, I found myself working on the defense side, not out of sympathy, not ideology, not doubt about the crime. A prohibited, concealed, and unnecessary investigative method had been normalized and defended. Silence would not have been restraint, it would have been complicity. Drift does not require conspiracy, it requires silence. And silence in this case had already done enough damage. Unbelievable. Nope. Actually, everything that they did, and if you actually look at everything as a whole, then you can start to question it all. And Cyray doesn't believe that there was a cleanup. And I'm just like, whew, whew, my goodness. Well, you don't know. I don't think that that was drift at all. I'm sorry. That was bad actors. And I just am like, why are you making excuses for them? I don't know. Wild. I call them filling out my uh, FOIA requests like the way they did. I call that incompetence. Hmm. You know, where is the oh, here. This blew me away too. So this chapter is called the choke point control as stress test, the Kohlberger case. Um Before any methodology is applied, the reader needs to understand the geography. It is simple. It stays simple. Everything that follows depends on it. Moscow, Idaho, and Pullman, Washington are small college towns separated by approximately 10 miles. They are connected by State Route 270, a two-lane highway that runs roughly east and west between them. Pullman sits to the west, Moscow sits to the east. The highway feeds into Moscow's Main Street, which runs through the center of town and connects to the residential neighborhoods on the east side, including the area around King road 10 miles east and west. The probable cause affidavit presented a vehicle route connecting Pullman to the King Road neighborhood, built on a single camera, captured on the WSU campus that investigators interpreted as the vehicle departing toward State Route 270. The inbound trip rested on that foundation. The return route was different, a separate path that the affidavit treated as part of the same behavioral narrative without equivalent evidentiary support. The question is what the choke point control reveals when it is applied to the route the investigation presented and what the investigation owed the court when the loop's answer contradicted the claim. What the investigation claimed. The investigation's route narrative works like a chain. Each link is a camera capture, and each capture is supposed to show the suspect vehicle one step closer to the crime scene. The chain begins in Pullman and ends at the King Road neighborhood in Moscow. Laid out simply, the sequence the investigation presented looked like this. A white sedan leaves the area of Kohlberger's apartment on the Washington State University campus in Pullman. It is captured on a surveillance camera at approximately 2:44 a.m., heading southeast toward State Route 270, the highway to Moscow. The vehicle is next captured further along the corridor, then on the outskirts of the King Road neighborhood, and eventually in the neighborhood itself. After the murders, the vehicle departs and is tracked back toward Pullman. That is a clean narrative, point A to point B, link by link, camera by camera. Presented this way, it reads as though the environment confirmed the route. Camera after camera, mile by mile, the vehicle moves east. The affidavit containing the sequence was presented to a court on December 23rd, 2022, to obtain cellular location records from AT&T. That is also the date the geolocation data began coming back to investigators and the date on which choke point control became not just relevant, but obligatory. And that's why he always has said the wheels fell off this fucking case to him on December 23rd, 2022. I disagree. Fell off way fucking earlier than that shit. When you have a route narrative built on camera captures and you receive cellular data that can be tested against the physical environment, you run the loop. Like you test it. You test every link in the chain against the geography, the timing, and the infrastructure the environment provides. That loop never ran. What follows are 3 tests. Each one applies the XYZ framework to a different link in the investigation's chain. Each test is self-contained. It does not depend on the others to reach its conclusion. Each one independently breaks the route. Together, they reveal an investigation that never once tested its own narrative against the environment it was built from. So the fucking drive tests prove that it's not accurate. Test 1 was this. Well, this is what he says is the tests. Test 1 was the first camera. The chain begins with the 2:44 a.m. capture. On the date the warrants were sought, the affidavit described the white sedan as traveling from the area of Kohlberger's apartment southeast through the WSU campus towards State Route 270, toward Moscow. That is the direction the route narrative requires. If the vehicle is heading southeast at 2:44, it is departing Pullman. The chain begins. Run the loop. Call the apartment X. Call State Route 270, the highway to Moscow, Z. And between X and Z, the suspect vehicle must travel through a defined corridor. That corridor is not dark. It is not unmonitored. It is lined with traffic cameras. Every camera between X and Z represents a choke point the vehicle cannot avoid if the route is real. If the vehicle traveled southeast from the apartment to State Route 270, those cameras had no choice but to record it. We know those cameras work. The return trip proves it. Oh, meaning this is exactly what I said. I said, Ashley, even if you're saying you don't think that cars can hey, well, cars can just turn around and come back because, and I was like, yeah, Ashley, but that would mean that you would still have it on camera because you have a camera right there, you dumb bitch. And so what Cyray is saying is that these cameras work because you have him supposedly coming in at 5 whatever, right? So we know those cameras work because the return trip proves it. When the vehicle came back from Moscow through the WSU campus back toward the apartment, that inbound corridor is the mirror of the route the investigation claims the vehicle took on the way out. On the return, the cameras, cut every pass. Each one sequenced, timed, consistent with the pace of a vehicle moving through that area. The infrastructure was active. The coverage was complete. The environment was recording. The departure recorded nothing, though. Not a particular capture. Oh, I'm sorry, not a partial capture. Not an ambiguous sighting that might or might not be the vehicle. Nothing. The same cameras that documented every step of the return did not capture a single frame of the vehicle leaving. The corridor between X and Z is not a theoretical gap. It is a tested corridor with a documented performance record. It performed on the return. It failed to perform on the departure because the vehicle was not there. Because the vehicle was not there. It was not doing between X and Y what the fuck you said it was doing. Otherwise, it'd be on those cameras. That is not an absence of evidence. That is evidence of absence. That is not an absence of evidence. That is evidence of absence. Run the loop. The 244 camera, the one the investigation pointed to as the chain's first link, does not show a departure. The updated affidavit filed December 29th, 2022, the one that we all read, revised the original claim that the vehicle was traveling southeast. The corrected version describes the vehicle heading north on Nevada Street at 244, not southeast. How is this not bad acting? Again, the corrected version, so the one on what they used on December 23rd prior to the 29th, they said that southeast, and then they changed it to say the updated affidavit filed December 29th, 2022, the arrest one, revised the original claim that the vehicle was traveling southeast. The corrected version describes the vehicle heading north on Nevada Street at 244, not southeast, not toward State Route 270. North, the opposite direction the route requires. The same updated affidavit adds a capture that did not appear in the earlier filing. The vehicle at 2:53 a.m. now heading back southeast on Nevada Street, back into the WSU residential housing area, not onto State Route 270, not toward Moscow, into the campus neighborhood the vehicle had just come from. God, I'm gonna go pull up my old fucking breakdown of I broke this down and Bella did it with me. And we were like, what the hell is going on for 9 minutes? And that's when I was like, it's not the same car. These fucking bastards. We called it back then. And we've been right the whole time. Just nothing like being validated, but how you're going to say that this is not bad actors is beyond me. It's fucking lying pieces of garbage. And then how can you believe anything that they do when they're lying about everything that they're saying? How do you believe that they have the right person when they're lying about every fucking thing? I can't believe in that. It doesn't mean that he's innocent, but I cannot beyond a reasonable doubt put somebody away for the rest of their fucking life or kill them. Doesn't mean that they're innocent. These people should all be ashamed of themselves. And anybody that's law enforcement and fucking actually reads this and is like, whatever. Can you imagine if people that were like YouTube creators had the same mentality as cops to protect cops at all costs? Let's all protect YouTubers at all costs. Fucking A. A car that goes north at 244 and returns into a residential neighborhood at 253 is not a car that left or that has left for Moscow. It is a car that went somewhere briefly and came back. The 244 camera does not show a departure. It shows a vehicle that is still in Pullman, still in the neighborhood where the suspect lives. 9 minutes after the route narrative says the journey began. But the direction error is secondary. He thinks that this is an error. He thinks that, and I'm like, you really don't think this. You know that they lie. They're lying. You know this. But the direction error is secondary. This isn't a fucking error. Even if the direction had been correct, even if the 244 capture had shown the vehicle pointed southeast from the start, the corridor between X and Y would still have answered the question. The choke points do not lie. The cameras that caught every frame of the return watched a departure that never happened. The first link in the chain does not connect. This is where the loop first breaks. Note what happened here. The investigation's own work, its own subsequent review of the same footage, produced data that contradicted the route as originally presented. The direction changed. A new capture was added. The return trip's complete camera record stood in documented contrast to a departure corridor that recorded nothing. But the route narrative did not change with any of it. The 244 capture continued to serve as the departure point. No reevaluation occurred. The posture held. Sigh. God damn it. That's not what the fuck happened, and you know it. A thorough analysis of the full camera. What do you mean a thorough analysis? It takes 4 minutes. 4 to check that shit out. A thorough analysis of the full camera record points toward a more probable explanation, a different departure route. So what Sai is saying is that all you guys had to do is, instead of being lazy lying pieces of shit, you should have sat down and figured out the way that he actually went to the fucking house. That's what Sai is saying. And what makes it more convincing that he'd be guilty is that he would take a different route to go there and a different route to come home. You dumbasses. But this is what happens when you work backwards, or this is what happens when it's like, here, this is who the person is, now make it fit. But guess what you still can't get? Guess what's still the problem though? That car on Indian Hills is not Brian Koberger. The cars that are doing everything over there on Ridge Road and out of sequence, you can't be at point B and not have passed point A yet on the cameras that you're talking about. So let's see if you go further to talk about that. A thorough analysis of the full camera record point towards more probable explanation. Different. Hey, it's just a different departure route. One the data actually supports. That route is not speculative. It is where the evidence leads when the loop is allowed to run. We will call it possible route B. We will return to it. So he's like, I'm going to explain that to you, but he's basically saying if these guys would have just realized instead of cheating, but he won't say that. Because what you need to talk about before this is the way that they got the records is that they put the white car in the phone moving together and saying it was going to Moscow. That's how they ever got the probable cause to ever get the phone shit. And when you read the book in chronological order, it's all there, but Sai makes excuses for these people. And I'm just like, I have no idea why the fuck you're doing that. Not a clue. What matters here is this. When the geolocation data arrived on December 23rd, the operative claim was southeast. When that claim was later revised, the revision should have triggered a re-examination of every link in the chain that depended on it. And it takes 2 seconds to see that it doesn't. Because you don't even have to do that. You should actually go back to the beginning and see you're not even getting to Brian Koberger except for what? How did you truly get to him? Why aren't you actually building a true and accurate suspect? This is not the case to do your methodology with, because I agree with his methodology. This is just not the case for it. And changing some of the stuff that happened to, like, I see that too, because it's just some of the stuff that just didn't, there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence of Washington having a report, nothing. When that claim was later revised, the revision should have triggered a re-examination of every link in the chain that depended on it. It did not. When the corridor between X and Z produced no camera support for the departure, that absence should have done the same. It did not. The chain was built, the loop never ran. Test 2 is the impossible 9 minutes. This is so fucking going back and The second test involves a camera that was not part of the original chain. Months after the initial warrant applications, investigators identified a surveillance camera at Floyd's Cannabis, a business located just off State Route 270 on the Moscow side of the corridor, essentially the doorstep of Moscow as you arrive from Pullman. That camera recorded a white vehicle at approximately 3:02 a.m. The investigation slotted Floyd's into the chain as the next sequential capture after the WSU campus sightings. The logic is straightforward. The vehicle leaves WSU, heads southeast on State Route 270, and passes Floyd's 9 minutes later. If the 253 capture did not exist, that sequence might hold. The vehicle is heading southeast at 244. Floyd's is southeast down the highway, and 18 minutes is more than enough time. Well, duh. But it doesn't take, that's what I always said, though. It doesn't take that much time. So what was he going, like 2 miles an hour? But by the time Floyd's was identified, investigators already possessed the 253 capture. Their own revised affidavit placed the vehicle heading back into the WSU residential area at 2:53 a.m., not on State Route 270, not heading toward Moscow, but turning into a campus neighborhood. Where is this 2:53 a.m. camera? It hasn't come out yet. Apply the loop. X is the 253 capture position. A residential street is the WSU housing area. Z is Floyd's Cannabis at 302. Y is every road, every turn, and every second required to get from one to the other. Yep. 9 minutes. A vehicle that is in the WSU student housing area at 253, pointed into a residential neighborhood, cannot reach Floyd's Cannabis by 302. The road geometry does not allow it. The distance does not compress. The turns do not disappear. From the position the investigation's own camera recorded at 253, Floyd's is unreachable in the time available. This did not require advanced analysis. It required someone to look at what they already had, the 253 capture in their own revised affidavit, and check it against the new camera they just had found. That check would have taken minutes, just like I said a couple minutes ago. It would have told them that Floyd's does not follow from the 253 capture. The sequence is physically impossible. Nobody checked it. What do you mean nobody fucking checked it? They did. They didn't give a fuck. Nobody checked it. Floyd's was added to the chain. The narrative moved forward. A link that the investigation's own data had already killed was presented as confirmation of the route. Test 3, the road that recorded nothing. The third test does not require the reader to accept anything from the first two. Forget the direction at 244. Forget the 253 capture. Forget Floyd's. Give the investigation every benefit of every doubt. Assume the vehicle left Pullman, heading southeast on State Route 270, passes Floyd, and continued to Moscow in the King Road neighborhood. If that is true, the vehicle must travel through Moscow to get there. Going that way. That corridor is dark. State Route 270 feeds directly into Main Street as it enters town. Main Street is Moscow's central artery. Surveilled and canvassed. Documents the investigation knew those cameras existed. Law enforcement conducted an extensive video canvass of Moscow's camera infrastructure as part of the case, collecting surveillance footage from residential and business addresses throughout the area. That canvass was thorough enough to capture the victim's movements earlier in the evening at the corner club and the grub truck food vendor, both on Main Street. The cameras were operational. They were reviewed. They produced results when there were results to produce. A vehicle traveling from Pullman on State Route 270 must enter Moscow from the west. It must pass through the surveyed Main Street corridor. There is no State Route 270 route to the King Road neighborhood that avoids that camera infrastructure. None. Those cameras recorded nothing. They knew this, regardless of the 253, the 244. That to me is exculpatory in the sense of that should have been in the probable cause when you're explaining. That's exculpatory, that statement, because when you're talking about that this car took off and went into Moscow, we have, no, because you would need to have it on this camera over here and it's not there. Like, Meghan Marshall can suck a bag of fucking dicks. Those cameras recorded nothing. Not a partial capture, not an ambiguous sighting, nothing. The corridor the investigation's route requires, the only corridor available to a vehicle arriving from Pullman on State Route 270, which is what they claimed, because they needed the phone moving in sequence with that goddamn car to say that it's the same person to go after all of the phone shit and do the pen trap trace, all that bullshit. And none of them were moving together. That wasn't the right vehicle. In my opinion. It recorded no inbound white sedan during the window that the route demands. That absence is not a gap in coverage. Well, when you have someone like Van Leuven, Leslie Lehman, Gary Tolson, again, bag of dicks. It is not a technological limitation. It is not an explanation waiting to be found. It is the environment answering the question the loop was designed to ask. The answer is the vehicle was not here. The vehicle did not come through here. But that is not the end of this test. It is the setup. The first camera to record the suspect vehicle in the area of the King Road neighborhood that night was not on Main Street. It was not on Route 270. It was not on any road a vehicle from Pullman would use approaching from the west. It was on Indian Hills Drive, east of the crime scene, east of Highway 95, which bisects Moscow north to south. The vehicle was traveling westbound. Take a moment with that. A vehicle coming from Pullman on State Route 270 enters Moscow from the west. It approaches King Road from the west. Every road that connects 270 to the King Road neighborhood runs east. A vehicle on that route is traveling east toward the crime scene, not away from it. For a vehicle to appear westbound on Indian Hills Drive, like heading, westbound the way that we all know that it's coming back towards the King Road house. A vehicle to appear westbound on Indian Hills Drive, east of Highway 95, it cannot have come from Pullman on State Route 270. To be westbound at that location, it had to have already passed through Moscow entirely. Already east of Highway 95, already east of the crime scene, and be doubling back. Or it's not the fucking car. Or or it did not come from the west at all. Either answer is an atomic bomb going off inside the probable cause statement. Oh, there we go. But see, this is the thing, is that absolutely we agree. Boom. Yes. Right? Yes. And besides, that was the undercover car on Indian Hills. And I fucking told them that so long ago. I sent that shit in. I said, this is exactly where the undercovers were in that fucking feud, whatever the fuck it is. And that's right where, what's his name, dropped off some person on Indian Hill. So everyone can just get fucked. Where am I at here? If the vehicle came from the west on State Route 270, it had to pass through the entire Main Street corridor and continue east past the King Road neighborhood, past the center of town, across Highway 95, through all of it, before appearing on Indian Hills heading westbound. Every camera in that surveyed corridor would have recorded it. None of them did. The same canvas that captured the victims on Main Street earlier that evening recorded nothing of this vehicle passing through. The route the investigation presented cannot produce a westbound vehicle on Indian Hills Drive east of Highway 95. That's a fact. The geometry does not allow it. The camera record does not support it. The only thing the investigation had was a vehicle pointed in the wrong direction, on the wrong side of town, on a road that a Pullman to King Road route never touches. And that's what I said in the beginning. I said, you are never going to be able to connect Brian Colber from WSU. How are you able to say that the WSU car is the car on Moscow's campus? Because you can't. Not if there's no cameras. And that's what Ann Taylor's argument was from the beginning, is how are you just labeling that suspect vehicle one? There's nothing connecting the Indian Hill just to begin with. You are bypassing all of that shit. His car didn't fucking fly there. See, that's the thing, is that you think this is like teams. It's about the evidence. You're not working for or against anybody. And with if I was to ever take a job and be an expert, it's about the evidence. This is how I see it. Whatever side's like, yeah, actually, here, that's how we see it too. You can prove that, or you think this because of this, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Yep. This is how I went about it, blah, blah. But thinking about sides, that's not even it's just wrong. They lied. This is all fucking lies. This is not a gap in the chain. This is the chain contradicting itself at the exact moment it should be strongest. The first camera to place a suspect vehicle near the crime scene points the vehicle away from the direction the entire route narrative requires. Even the cameras on Indian Hills should have had it going past the houses this way to be able to turn around and go like the westbound way. The corridor recorded nothing because the vehicle did not use the corridor. The vehicle did not use the corridor because it did not come from Pullman on State Route 270. The Indian Hills capture did not show an arrival It showed a vehicle already there, already east of Moscow, already past everything the investigation claimed it had just traveled through, headed west toward a crime scene. It had apparently approached from the opposite direction entirely. That is what possible route B explains. It is not speculative. The data supports it. The westbound capture supports it. The corridor silence supports it. The elapsed time from Pullman supports it. We will return to it. What the loop requires here is not a new theory. It is the acknowledgement of what the investigation already had. A camera placing the vehicle east of Highway 95, westbound, in an area a Pullman via State Route 270 vehicle cannot reach without passing through a fully surveilled corridor that recorded nothing. The investigation had those records. The canvas was their own work. The Indian Hills direction was in their own documents. The loop never ran. The chain was presented to the court anyway, and it should have blown up. What the loop would have found. If choke point control had been applied when the cellular data arrived on December 23rd, the loop would have identified the corridor absence before the first affidavit was signed. That alone would have forced the question, if the vehicle did not travel that corridor, how did it get to the King Road neighborhood? God damn, that's exactly what I said. How did you get to Brian Kohlberger? Why do you think that's Brian Kohlberger's car? How to get there? How to get in Moscow? When did it get there? That alone would have forced the question, if the vehicle did not travel that corridor, how did it get to that King Road neighborhood? Or what about that it's not that? The answer was already in the data, says Cyree. The Indian Hills Drive capture, the first camera to record the suspect vehicle near the King Road neighborhood, shows the white sedan traveling westbound, not eastbound from Main Street, westbound. A vehicle arriving via State Route 270 from Pullman approaches from the east. A vehicle captured going westbound at Indian Hills Drive is not arriving from the east. It is arriving from the north. And the timeline confirms it. From the moment Kohlberger's phone stopped reporting to the cellular network in Pullman to the Indian Hills capture at 3:26 a.m., the elapsed time is irreconcilable with the State Route 270 route the affidavit describes. The distance is too short for that amount of time. Yep. The northern approach explains it. East from Pullman toward Moscow, but on a rural roads well north of State Route 270, bypassing the highway corridor entirely. The route crosses Highway 95 well north of Moscow, continues east past the town, then swings south and loops back west toward Indian Hills Drive. It is a wide arc east along the rural roads, south past Moscow on the east side, then back west that arrives at Indian Hills from a direction the State Route 270 corridor cannot account for. That route accounts for the elapsed time. That route explains the westbound capture. That route does not pass through the surveyed corridor. That route does not pass Floyd's. That route is not recorded by the cameras that found nothing. because it does not use the roads those cameras covered. And that route is not speculative. Well, kind of. Prior pattern of life data places Kohlberger on this northern approach on previous visits to the area. The behavioral baseline was in the records. The same methodology that confirmed David Pagnio's 3 pre-crime trips to a creek bottom outside of Prescott would have identified it before the first warrant was ever drafted. The POL, which is the pattern of life, authorized that assertion. The choke point analysis would have confirmed it. The result would have been a route narrative that the environment corroborates rather than contradicts, because it describes what actually happened rather than what the investigation assumed happened. They didn't assume anything. Something else to consider that the investigation offered as confirmation of guilt. Investigators noted that Brian Kohlberger's phone went dark during the window in question, powered off, disconnected from the network. The affidavit characterized this as a deliberate concealment, consistent with a suspect who understood that a live device leaves a trail. The implication is straightforward. He knew enough to turn it off. That is probably correct. Sit with it. Brian Kohlberger was a doctoral student in criminology. He had spent years studying how investigations work, how offenders are identified, and how the mistakes criminals make become the evidence that convicts them. He understood surveillance infrastructure. He understood digital trails. He understood that a connected phone is a witness, so he turned it off. That is not the behavior of someone who then drives the most surveyed route available, straight down 270 through the Moscow's Main Street corridor, past every operational camera the investigation's own canvas had just documented without triggering a single capture. The investigators cannot have it both ways. Either Kohlberger was methodical enough to eliminate his digital signature before leaving Pullman, in which case he was also methodical enough to avoid the cameras, which means the corridor silence is exactly what you would expect, and the route the investigation described is the one he deliberately did not take, or he was careless enough to drive through a fully surveyed corridor and somehow go undetected by every camera in it, in which case, why turn the phone off at all? The phone off behavior and the State Route 270 route cannot coexist inside the same suspect. One describes a man who understood operational security and planned accordingly. The other describes a man who drove straight through the most monitored path available and got lucky 10 times in a row. He was not lucky. He was not sloppy. This was rehearsed. The camera silence on the State Route 270 corridor is not a mystery to be explained away. It is the expected output of a route that was never used, chosen deliberately by someone who understood exactly what a camera records, and exactly how to make sure it records nothing. The loop, had it run, would have recognized that. The phone off behavior and the corridor silence are not independent anomalies. They are the same behavior seen from two different instruments. Together, they describe a man who knew what he was doing. Sigh, then you're putting 3 fucking white sedans in Pullman at the same time. That's what the state's looking at. Just like then you have to ask yourself this, and how stupid could you be to keep making these loops around the house if you're going to say that you don't want to be seen? Then you would have parked farther away and walked a little bit. Like, you can't have it both ways, right? Either he's a calculated, sophisticated, I know what the fuck to do type of person, but then why would you make 4 fucking loops around? Or are you going to sit here and say that he wasn't because it was somebody else and that he was only the last one? Three tests, one answer. Again, one would have to ask themselves. 120 people were working this case. So many experts are working this case from the FBI. And nobody thought to say, hey, like, so they weren't in his phone the way to do pattern of life. They weren't in his phone like that. They weren't in his phone, and they were claiming that they didn't have the timing advance records. And you're going off of cell towers. Three tests, one answer. Each test stands alone. The first camera does not show a departure. The 9 minutes gap to Floyd's is physically impossible from the position the investigation's own data recorded. The surveyed inbound quarter between Floyd's and King Road recorded nothing. Any one of these caught early changes the trajectory of the investigation's route narrative. They caught it early. They clearly lied. All three together reveal something more fundamental than a wrong turn or a missed camera. They reveal an investigation that never tested its own claims, not when the cellular data arrived, not when the direction was revised, not when new cameras were discovered months later. At no point did anyone apply the data they already possessed to the narrative they were building. They never did that because they knew that it was going to go against it. They already knew that. That's why they never tested it. They already knew that. So I'm not understanding that how you cannot see that. Because they knew that the phone had not shut off at that time. They knew all of these things. The one thing that size work does not show is the big problem that you have between the Indian Hills vehicle and the timing of when it gets and is supposed to be seen on the Ridge Road camera and the it's not accurate. There's two vehicles, which makes sense because there's like 3 or 4 white cars over there. And one of them is the undercover car. And Saya is totally missing the fact that that vehicle that's in and on Indian Hills is the suspect vehicle 1, and that's the undercover car. And Jacob Tisdall went ahead and claimed that car in report 10 or 15 or whatever it was. They revealed an investigation that never tested its own claim, not when the cellular data arrived, not when the direction was revised, not when the new cameras were discovered months later. At no point did anyone apply the data they had already possessed to the narrative they were building. New information was absorbed into the narrative they were building. Or I'm sorry. Yeah. At no point did anyone apply the data they already possessed to the narrative they were building. New information was absorbed into the existing story without ever being checked against old information. The chain grew longer, the links never got stronger. This is the central lesson of the stress test. Choke point control applied to the Colbert investigation would not have weakened the case against him. It would have made the case structurally sound for the first time. The real route, confirmed by POL, but you are not getting to that point. You're never getting probable cause because they had to lie to say that the phone and the white car were moving in concert together, going to the house. If you do not let that warrant say that on the 23rd, okay, you don't get to POL. You don't have Brian Kohlberger's phone. You don't have it extracted and downloaded. You are never getting anything. That's why they fucking lied. And he knows it. You're never getting there structurally sound when it's all built on lies. What is POL? It's pattern of life. You need 180 days worth of data to use POL and it be structurally like sound. The real route confirmed by POL and validated by the absence of evidence on a corridor it never used produces a probable cause affidavit that survives the loop. No, the fuck it. No way. Not a chance. You want to know why? Because you never used IgG. You're still lying. You can't get past that because you never got to Brian Kohlberger because Cy truly believes and thinks that there's a report with Brian Kohlberger's name on it from November 29th out of WSU, and that just doesn't exist. It does not exist. It does not exist. I asked for every single one of Curtis Whitman's reports that he wrote. He's the only one that could have wrote that because he did it. Does not exist. The investigators had the data. They had the cameras. They had the POL records. How? Where? From what? What records give you the POL records? They had every tool the methodology requires. What they did not run was the loop. And because the loop did not run, an investigation with strong independent evidence, a DNA match, a surviving witness, and documented prior visits to the area went to court with a route narrative that its own camera canvas had already quietly refuted. What they did not run was the loop. And because the loop did not run, an investigation with strong independent evidence, oh my God, you're so wrong about this. A DNA match, a surviving witness. A surviving witness that never made the first phone call. Bethany did. What was Dylan doing? Bethany called Dylan. That is so important. That is so fucking important. Everything then that Dylan said to every investigator is a lie. Every single time she said it. Her saying that 10 to 20 minutes from the time that Kaylee said this until she saw that person and all the things that happened in between that, and that she's yelling out and then she's calling There's none of that on the phone. It's crazy. Again, Ann Taylor's the only person that I will believe unless I see a fucking file handed to me on what any of these experts were handed. And they have a ton of other cases. What was your role in this? What information did you have? And they just didn't have it. And so I would love to hear, I'm not disputing the fact that that Brian Colbert could have taken that route and gone that east way and whatever like that. But I'm saying that you still have all these other problems that for whatever reason this book is claiming is not a problem. This is, the investigators had the data. They had the cameras. They had the POL records. They had every tool the methodology requires. What they did not run was the loop. And because the loop did not run, an investigation with strong independent evidence, a DNA match, a surviving eyewitness, and documented prior visits to the area went to court with a route narrative that its own camera canvas had already quietly refuted. I thought it loudly refuted, but mainstream media wouldn't dare talk about that to make it loud. What authority without structure costs? This case had everything that makes investigators confident. This is just what? Federal involvement, experienced personnel, months of work, a high-profile investigation with enormous public and institutional pressure to resolve. That confidence is visible in the work product, in the certainty of the route description, in the absence of any accounting for what the corridor camera did not find, in the presentation of a sequential camera chain that did not survive the geometry of the roads it claimed to use. Confidence is not a methodology. Authority is not confirmation. And when an investigation allows either to substitute for the structural discipline of running the loop, it does not merely risk being wrong. It manufactures a weapon and hands it to the defense. Oh, fuck no. That is, what a spin. That's a spin. Basically, he's saying because you did all of this, you just handed the defense weapons that you did not. Why do you think that happened? Because they had no fucking case and they had to make it up from jump. God damn. That's why. And they knew they didn't have a case. So it was like, well, if we don't do this, then we don't have a case regardless. So we might as well just go ahead and try and cheat and get away with it. Duh. Or come out and admit that these people just aren't fucking bright. How about that? And they don't have integrity. Because I would be the one saying, no, I will stay here all night until I figure this out. I'm not doing whatever the fuck you guys are talking about doing. We're not doing that. So get that out of your heads. And if you say another word about that ever around me, I'm reporting you. I should actually report you right now. Because now I just don't fucking trust you. And I will never trust you again. 4 kids were murdered. We owe it to them to build a fucking case. And since we already fucking have a name here, go babysit him until we can do it. Go babysit him. You follow him everywhere the fuck he goes. That's why they were following him. Until we can build this case. Until we can make probable cause. Until we can figure it out. Go babysit him. Everywhere he goes, you go. A skilled defense team does not need to prove innocence. It needs to put the camera footage on a screen and show the jury that the first camera does not depict the departure. It needs to show the 9-minute impossibility. It needs to show the corridor between Floyd's and King Road. The cameras that were optional, or I'm sorry, the cameras that were operational, the investigators' own canvas records, and then the silence. The window during which the surveilled inbound corridor recorded nothing. And it needs to show that none of these contradictions appeared in the documents presented to any court. That demonstration does not stay contained to the route question. It never does. Once a jury understands that investigators presented a sequence the camera contradicts, a timing claim the road geometry defeats, and a corridor claim the canvas disproves, and that none of these findings appeared in the documents presented to the court, the credibility of every other assertion to include, but he just says every other claim. No, the credibility of all of these humans, Sai, the credibility of all of these fucking scumbags goes out the window. But this is how he says it. Call these motherfuckers out. And that's just why, it's so unfortunate is that, man, you had the material to do it. And that none of these findings appeared in the documents presented to the court. The credibility of every other assertion the investigation made is in play. The DNA handling, I thought you said it was good. I thought you said everything was pristine. The DNA handling, the cell data interpretation, the characterization of the eyewitness account. What do you mean the interpretation of that? That wasn't no interpretation. Wait till Aunt Taylor was going to so politely and gently shred. And you're going to show that this happened earlier. But he says the DNA handling, the cell data interpretation, the characterization of the eyewitness account, the prior visits, every conclusion the investigation reached with the same confidence that backed the route claim is now subject to the question the defense will ask quietly and repeatedly in front of 12 people who cannot unknow what they just have been shown. Brian Colbert pleaded guilty on the eve of that trial. And that's why all of you guys ask, why the fuck would you never go to trial with this? Right? Why would you never go to trial with this? Brian Colbert pleaded guilty on the eve of that trial, that you were going to be able to. I believe that Sai probably thinks that Brian Colbert would have walked. If there was a trial, I believe that he would have walked. Now, was that a good thing? I don't fucking know. I don't want killers out there. Are you kidding me? I don't know if he did it. I don't know if he didn't do it. But then he goes ahead and he pleads guilty on the eve of trial. Just like the book says, that's accurate. He received life without parole. The death penalty was removed. All appellate rights were waived. That doesn't mean anything. The route analysis, the corridor absence, the disclosure obligations that were never met, none of it was ever tested in open court. The methodology failure did not threaten the verdict. It threatened the sentence. Disagree. Disagree completely. Because if he truly believed in that, Bill Thompson would have never offered the plea deal. People would have lost their jobs if this went to trial. It wasn't about the verdict at that point. If this goes to trial, people are losing their jobs. People are losing their careers. Is his career ending? Just like Sai's affidavit said, just like Hitler claimed that it would. Like your accusations would be career ending for people. And he never gave Syed the opportunity to talk in that, that hearing, remember? The methodology failure did not threaten the verdict. The fuck it did. It threatened it to even happen. It threatened the sentence. Consider what that means. Culber spent years in a doctoral program studying serial killers, how they think, how they operate, how investigations find them, and how investigations fail. He understood better than most defendants ever could exactly what the route analysis revealed and exactly what leverage it created. He pleaded guilty. He is alive. He also waived all appellate rights. This book was wrote before the ruling just came down. The Supreme Court of the United States has already addressed what that means in Graza versus Idaho. See, his book is outdated already. Hunter versus the United States is now what's top dog. So this is going to have to get removed. In Graza versus Idaho, the court held that no appeal waiver serves as an absolute bar to all appellate claims. The defendant who signs away the right to appeal retains at minimum the right to challenge claims that fall outside the waiver scope. Constitutional violations, Brady material. Remember I was telling you guys about that? I was telling you guys about Brady. I'm on the cusp of a lot of Brady stuff, believe it or not. And believe it or not, Moscow sent me a bill for $15.02 for what Eric Warner left out of a report that I asked for, a public request. They had the fucking audacity, after I caught them red-handed, to try to make me pay. Yeah. Constitutional violations, Brady material. Claims the plea agreement was never designed to foreclose. The court was explicit. An appeal waiver does not end the inquiry. It narrows it. So the route analysis in this chapter, the corridor silence, the Brady obligations that attached and were never honored. So Syray is saying that there is Brady material. He is saying that they did not disclose everything that they were supposed to disclose. The affidavit that presented a chain that the investigation's own data had already broken does not disappear because a plea was entered. It waits. Whether it is ever raised, by whom, and in what forum are questions this book cannot answer. What it can say is this: the door Graza left open is exactly the width of the problems documented here. So actually, I stand corrected there. I also think Hunter just strengthens it. This may not be over for families. This may not be over for families now have to carry that. Do you understand that this chapter of this book right here, that's in a textbook, could literally, I don't know if this is a good thing, because like I said, I don't know if he fucking killed people. It could free Brian Koberger. I think there's enough evidence to strongly suggest that the car that's on Indian Hills Trails Road, whatever, is not Brian Koberger's. and that it's the undercover car. And then when you put into the mix of people deleting themselves off of the schedule, um, people acting like they didn't work that night on a party patrol, multiple other people that items look like they're deleted from that docket. And then you take Jacob Tisdall talking about that he was driving in those circles and he's basically claiming the movements of that vehicle. Something that Ray doesn't answer for me is if Brian Kober had visited the area a bunch and he knew that there'd be cameras in the area, right? Why would Brian Kober make 4 fucking loops around that house? Because you just said it in this that he knows all about that and he would never. Why would you ever do that? Either he's this doctoral student or he's not. And we've been saying that over here for a long time. And it's just like, why did they have to put the killer in a car? And they didn't when Jacob Tisdall went ahead and claimed that car, but then it almost looks like it's like, why wouldn't he be parked somewhere else? I already know the answer. And I think he's there on the 12th or the 11th. Now, make sure you go get your book. Learn all about these motherfuckers. Hippler, and these families. Chiefs, what's up, girl? Happy 4th. What's good? Yep, it's the wrong car, so story does not. Yeah, there's just a lot. You like that? Makes sense now why he didn't contact you first to be a guest. I don't know what that means. He's going on Custody Queens because he wants to address the Brent Turby. He wants to address what Brent Turby said and what Chris Holland said and did on the Custody Queens channel. He's like, I need to go take care of that first. And I said, I'm not playing games. I'm not in this fucking pissing war with, I need to go do this. I don't give a fuck about any of that. So if that's what you need to go do, then just go do that. That's the conversation. I'm not, just go. I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, who the fuck cares what Brent Turby said? What the fuck does that have to do with you? And us chopping up and talking about the case in terms of what you did, what you were brought in for, and why are you speaking out now? Are you even allowed to speak out? If the fog light's lit, you must have quit. Can we get t-shirts and put fog lights on our titties? Headlights, honk honk. So God damn, this book makes them look so fucking bad. It makes the state look so bad. even though Ray doesn't say it, you guys, this textbook, okay, it's like read through the lines. Like, let's just let Ray be gullible, okay? That's what reading through the lines would be. Because anybody that reads this and all the law enforcement people that get to go take these classes and do whatever, and they're going to be like, do you guys know that there's a chapter about the judge in here, right? The judge chapter. He tells Hitler what's up. You know, where is my bookmark? Oh, here it is. My favorite chapter of this entire book is the Jennifer McCabe chapter. Chapter 5.2, the House Long Artifacts chapter. It's the sub. I mean, it's like chapter 5, and that's like the subtitle, and it's House Long. It was a great title, House Long, and literally in 8 pages explains exactly what the fuck went down with the Google search, and he takes and has and I'm right there with him. Takes Jennifer McCabe's back because of the data, and I see it exactly the same way because it's the only way to see it. It's now like been in so many. It was at a huge 2025. I want to say it was a convention. What the hell was it? But it's called How Bad Can It Get? How bad can it get? Why artifacts matter. On the night of January 28th, 2022, Jennifer McCabe came home from a bar in Canton, Massachusetts, climbed into bed, and did what parents do. She picked up her phone and checked her daughter's hockey scores. So, but yeah, it goes on for, it explains it all, and nobody is testifying about that Google search and that it was at 227 because it's been completely shredded. It was never at 227. A network session existed at 227. Here it is. In October of 2025, Kevin R. Horan published a post-trial analysis of the Reed timestamp dispute. And he's the bigwig of FBI. He's the bigger when it comes to that. Oh, where is that? So yeah, go and read chapter 5.2. No, wait here. So 11.2 is People versus Jones. That's what happens without a standard. He talks about that Colorado case. And then what's the chapter that he talks about? He goes and he talks about yeah. It is okay, here. It's chapter 11.5, the Kohlberger, the timing data. So it's called The Motion. 2 years later, on February 24, 2025, the state of Idaho filed a motion in limine seeking to prohibit the defense from making any reference to the absence of AT&T timing advance records for Brian Kober. The state's argument was straightforward. AT&T records are produced by their Global Legal Demand Center. AT&T GLDC did not begin producing timing advance records until May of 2023. All records for the defendant's phone were obtained from GLDC in December of 2022. That was their argument, that GLDC did not produce timing advance records yet, therefore they did not exist. The defense expert, he doesn't call it himself, he says, the defense expert working in the field of call detail record analysis for over 25 years, having obtained his first AT&T records in 1997, having spent 20 years in law enforcement, having testified in over 100 proceedings in state and federal courts across 30 states, prepared an affidavit responding to the state's argument as filed. The affidavit documented that the FBI had obtained timing advance records from AT&T for over 3,800 devices in the Kober investigation through a different compliance unit within AT&T, not the GLDC. The FBI's pathway to AT&T was not the GLDC pathway. Special Agent Balance's own communications documented this. The warrants in the Kober investigation were served through the FBI to AT&T following the same process that produced timing advance records for other phones in November of 2022. The affidavit brought receipts. People in law enforcement disagree with it. It brought receipts. The affidavit didn't bring receipts. The affidavit made statements. The receipts would have come in a hearing because there was nothing that was what was attached to it. I shouldn't say it didn't bring receipts. It was after they put in the second part that Cy didn't get a chance to respond. So he's saying that his affidavit brought receipts. It brought documentation. It brought the operational knowledge of someone who has navigated AT&T's compliance architecture for a quarter of a century. It addressed the state's argument, the argument that actually existed when the affidavit was written. So he's saying, I wrote my affidavit after their first claim. He's saying the shift. On March 24th, 2025, 1 month after the original motion, the state filed a reply. The argument changed. It did. It did change. The original motion said that GLDC did not produce timing advance records until May of 2023. The reply said something different. In quotes, it said, before June of 2023, AT&T retained timing advance records for 7 days. These are not the same argument. The first says the mechanism to produce the records did not exist at GLDC in 2022. The second says the records existed but expired after 7 days. Attached to the reply were certificates of authentication from AT&T GLDC signed by the director of compliance introducing the 7-day retention language for the first time. The defense expert's affidavit completed before the reply was filed on March 26, 2025. So again, the way that it would look is he's saying that the expert's affidavit completed before the reply was filed on March 26, 2025, 2 days after the state introduced an entirely new argument. The affidavit did not address the 7-day retention period. It could not have. The 7-day retention period was not part of the state's argument when the affidavit was drafted and completed. The expert responded to the motion that existed. The state then changed the motion, and the gap that change created was used against the expert as though it were a failure of analysis rather than a consequence of sequence. The hearing. On March 18th, 2025, the court issued an order denying live witness testimony at the April 9th hearing. Witnesses could submit declarations. The court reserved the possibility of hearing remote testimony if it felt or if it determined such testimony was necessary. The defense expert was available by video stream, ready to testify, ready to respond to the state's new argument in real time, ready to walk the court through the CALEA form, ready to explain the distinction between GLDC and the FBI's compliance pathway, ready to address the 7-day retention period and explain why timing advanced data from December or from any period ground truths the network the prosecution's entire cellular analysis depends on. The court never activated the feed. The ruling. On April 18, 2025, Judge Stephen Hippler issued a written order memorializing the oral rulings from the April 9th hearing. The state's motion was granted. The defense could conduct a narrow voir dire of Special Agent Balance outside the presence of the jury, limited to one question: whether he received Kohlberger's timing advance records covering the early morning hours of November 13th and the months prior. If Balance denied receiving them, the defense could not explore the matter further. Not in voir dire, not before the jury. The inquiry was closed. In footnote 10 of the order, the court wrote, Mr. Ray's affidavit, which forms the basis of the defense's challenge, is replete with speculation and unfounded and thus highly improper accusations against the state. Further, not once in his affidavit does he address AT&T's 7-day retention period, which fully explains why the state was unable to obtain relevant timing advance records for the defendant. End quote. The affidavit was characterized as speculation. The experts documented, sourced, operationally grounded concerns built on 25 years of carrier compliance experience, supported by evidence that the FBI obtained timing advance records for thousands of other devices through the same process in the same investigation, were dismissed as quote-unquote highly improper accusations. And the basis for that dismissal was the expert's failure to address an argument that did not exist when the affidavit was written. The characterization. During the April 9th hearing, from the bench in open court in a death penalty prosecution subject to a gag order and wall-to-wall media coverage, months before jury selection, the judge characterized the defense's expert's position as a conspiracy theory. Consider the structural consequence of that characterization. The defense's primary cellular evidence expert, the person retained to challenge the FBI's coverage mapping, to identify the missing data, to explain the duration field omission, to walk the jury through the difference between assertion and measurement in digital evidence, was labeled from the bench before a jury was seated. The jury pool is watching. The media is reporting. The characterization enters the public record. It does not expire. It does not require a citation. It is now part of the atmosphere in which this trial takes place. When that expert takes the stand to testify about undersized coverage areas, missing analysis, incorrect assumptions, absent timing advance data, a duration field that contradicts the prosecution's foundational timeline, and a warrant return that says records were received, every word arrives pre-contaminated by a judicial characterization issued months before the expert was permitted to speak. The expert brought receipts. The court never examined them. The label was applied to paper. The court declined to test, and the label will outlive the paper. The convergence. Pull back and see the architecture. The duration field omission established that the FBI cast possessed data during the duration field omission established that the FBI cast possessed data contradicting the prosecution's timeline, documenting their understanding of it, and omitted it. Again, how do you not claim that that's bad actors? Fucking crazy. The temporal sufficiency standard from the section 11.2, the holistic examination obligation, was violated. Available data was selectively presented. The full temporal record was not honored before the foundational claim was permitted to form. The timing advance records established that the FBI specifically engineered a request for the one data product that empirically validates or destroys the coverage maps on which the prosecution's entire cellular analysis rests. The warrant was authorized. The CALEA form was submitted. The return says records received. The data was never disclosed. Cyray is saying they got that fucking data because it would have said something else. The state's motion sought to prevent the defense from even mentioning the absence. The argument shifted between filings. The expert's affidavit responding to the argument that existed was characterized as a conspiracy when it failed to address an argument that did not exist. When the affidavit was written, the court denied the expert the ability to testify, then used the written affidavit, frozen in time, unable to respond to the state's pivot, as the basis for discrediting him. The court then foreclosed inquiry. If the one person being accused of the omission denies it, the question dies. The warrant return, a court document filed under oath stating records were received, sits in the record. Nobody asked about it. No framework required them to. And then the judicial characterization sealed the closure. From the bench, on the record, in open court, months before trial, the expert who identified every failure this section documents was branded a conspiracy theorist by the judge who will preside over the trial where those failures matter. This is not a double standard. This is the full architectural of a systematic failure in the digital evidence era. No, it's just bad actors. These are just corrupt motherfucking people. Sorry. Every participant, prosecution, defense, judiciary, is operating without the framework this chapter exists to provide. And in the absence of that framework, the system does not pause. It does not self-correct. It accelerates. Narrative replaces evidence. Authority replaces validation. And the structural safeguards that should catch the failure, warrant, returns, CALEA requests, empirical records, expert testimony, they just sit in the file unexamined while the court rules on the surface. The landing. Why this matters when the defendant is guilty. The reader who believes Brian Kober committed these murders needs to understand what this section is not. This section is not an argument for innocence. It is not a claim that flawed cellular evidence means the wrong person was charged. It is not a defense of Brian Kober. This section is an argument about the machine. A criminal justice system does not derive its authority from outcomes. It derives its authority from process. When the process is credible, the outcome carries weight, guilty or not guilty. The verdict settles something. The public can trust it. The victims' families can rely on it. The appellate court can sustain it. When the process is not credible, the outcome is just a result. It does not settle. It generates appeals, public doubt, and institutional erosion that extends far beyond a single case. Every shortcut the system takes to convict the person the public wants convicted becomes the shortcut it uses on the person the public has never heard of. Every precedent set in the case everyone is watching applies with equal force to the case that no one is watching. When a judge rules that timing advanced data challenges are speculative, that an expert raising documented concerns about selective data handling is making highly improper accusations, that ruling does not expire when the Kober case ends. It becomes the thing the next prosecutor cites, the thing the next judge relies on, the thing the next defense attorney has to overcome before they can even ask the question. And the next defendant will not have DNA on a knife sheath, will not have video surveillance from multiple angles, will not have Amazon purchase records. The next defendant might have only cellular evidence. And the coverage maps in that case will carry the same problems: undersized coverage areas, unvalidated assumptions, missing ground truth, because the tool that checks those maps was ruled irrelevant in the case everyone was watching. Fucking eats his whole fucking ass. Cyray is just destroyed Hitler. Fucking A, man. Literally just splits this man asshole. He just obliterated this guy's asshole. He fucking rearranged his guts. All right. Because it's the truth. Who the fuck does Hitler think he is? Hitler doesn't know shit about timing advance records. If the cellular evidence in the Kohlberg case supports a finding of guilt, it should support that finding because it was tested, not because the court prevented the test. A conviction built on untested evidence is not justice, it is luck. And luck is not a system, it is the absence of one. The standard this chapter proposes does not take sides, it does not help the defense, it does not help the prosecution. It makes the answer reliable, and a reliable answer is the only thing that protects everyone. The victims who deserve accountability, the defendants who deserve fairness, and the public who deserves to trust that the system works regardless of who is sitting at the defense table. And regardless of who the fuck the prosecutor is. Fuck these assholes. Lazy fucks. The favor fell on the prosecution this time. The favor fell on the prosecution this time. It may fall on the defense next time, but judicial credibility is the thing that does not survive either way or either one. And once judicial credibility is gone, once the public, the bar, and the appellate courts conclude that trial judges are making gatekeeping decisions about digital evidence based on whether incomplete picture, making gatekeeping decisions about digital evidence based on whether incomplete picture the adversarial system produces that day, the system does not merely weaken. It loses the one thing no procedural mechanism can restore: the belief that the process was worth trusting. That belief is not Kohlberger's to lose. It belongs to the system, and the system is losing it. One ruling at a time in every courthouse, in every jurisdiction, every day, because no standard exists to prevent it. This section does not ask whether Brian Kohlberger is guilty. That question belongs to a jury operating inside a process that earns the authority to answer it. And if you ask Cyray a really good question here, you'd want to ask him this. I know that you believe that Brian Kohlberger is guilty, right? But is he guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? And I bet you in a courtroom, ask him that. And he's going to say, well, that's left for the jury. Okay. But just ask him with what they were going to be presenting and you guys are going to be presenting. Is Brian Kohlberger guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? That's a different question. And I believe he thinks that he would walk. There was no consequences here. There's only more victims, and that's what Hitler's like. This should have went to trial. $8 million. And this didn't go to trial. Huh. Only in Idaho, baby. See you on the next one. Peace. He actually said this is the only case that the defendant got fucked over. No, he says there's a bunch of cases. Hitler was more concerned with his vacation hours. No, Hitler was just pulling favors. Syrie needed to call spade though. And so he called Hitler out, but he doesn't want to call out Bill Thompson, Ashley Jennings, the FBI. And that's where my questions lie with, which is why'd you pick to only call him out? These people lied. Everybody lied. I'm telling you, the only person that I kept like, I felt like if you actually go back and look at it, what did Ann Taylor lie to us about? Write in the comment section what Ann Taylor lied to us about. And I want to look up all the ones that you think that she lied to us about. Do a little pros and cons. Maybe we'll do it tomorrow. Write down all the lies that Ann Taylor said. And then we'll do on the other side all the lies that the prosecution and the state, the cops, like we're going to do. Let's talk about these lies. Peace.